Okay, we're gonna have to start Wichita Falls over again. Wichita Falls, Texas, September 1960. Found within a batch of documents concerning Project Moondust, ostensibly an Air Force operation designed to recover crashed Soviet space debris, but rumored to have played an integral role in crashed UFO retrieval incidents and declassified by the Department of State in 1994, comes the following report of 11 October 1960. Subject Moondust Report, Wichita Falls, Texas, 28 September 1960. To Directors of Special Investigations, Headquarters USAF, Washington 25, D.C. References made to telephonic spot report from this district office of 28 September 1960 referred to AFCSI 60 concerning a moon dust report in the vicinity of Wichita Falls, Texas on 28 September 1960. On October 4th, 1960, the Assistant Provost Marshal at Sheppard Air Force Base, Texas, Major Carter O. Cooper, advised that an ATIC team from the 1127th USAF Field Activities Group, Fort Belvoir, Virginia, headed by Captain Alexander, not further identified, had investigated the incident, according to Major Cooper. The evaluations of the ATIC team could not be released at this local level. However, he said he had been informed unofficially that examination of recovered fragments indicated that the incident did not come within the moon dust category. In substance, the following information was reported to your directorate on 28 September 1960. A Maj, or maybe this is an abbreviation for Majestic, MAJ E. Galani, 4245th Strategic Wing, SAAC, Sheppard Air Force Base, Texas, received a report at 0425 hours on 28 September 1960 from an unknown source to the effect that an unidentified flying object had crashed some 5 or 8 miles west of Wichita Falls, Texas. Sheppard Air Force Base police conducted investigation at the scene and also learned that the reported incident had been observed by several civilian police officers of the Wichita Falls Department. At the scene, miscellaneous charred debris, including shreds of a parachute, reportedly was recovered and maintained in custody of the Sheriff Air Force Base Provost Marshal. Major Cooper, Supra, who came to Sheppard Air Force Base from an assignment involving work related to moon dust, made a personal evaluation. The evaluation was largely not evaluation. The evaluation was largely a non-evaluation, although the reference to shreds of a parachute having been reported recovered suggested a wholly terrestrial explanation for the case, remained unresolved to everyone's satisfaction, and was quietly forgotten, but when it became clear after systematic and repeated searches of the area that no more material was likely to be recovered. Las Vegas. Incident, USA, September, or April. Where did I get September? My God. USA, April 1962. The bulk of research and revelations. The bulk and research and revelations pertaining to this case can be credible to the late Frank Edwards radio host and to Kevin Randall, the writer and researcher who also co-authored with Don Schmidt several books on the Roswell controversy. Richard M. Dolan, author of UFOs and the National Security State, here provides an outstanding summary of the case. On April 18, 1962, an unidentified red glowing object was moving west very rapidly over Oneida, New York. Was it a meteor? If so, it was quite unusual in the first place. It was tracked on radar, which, while possible, is exceedingly rare. Second, as it passed across the country, Air Defense Command alerted all bases along its path and at least two Air Force bases, Luke Air Force Base near Phoenix and Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, sent jet interceptors after it. Why pursue a meteor? Finally, the entire sighting from New York to Nevada lasted minutes. This gives an average speed of 4,500 miles per hour, as well the slowest speed ever recorded for a meteor. When the object passed over Nefty, Utah, people on the ground heard jets following it. The object then landed at Eureka, Utah. Several witnesses saw it as a glowing orange oval which emitted a low whirring sound. When it landed, it disrupted the electrical service from a nearby power station. It then rose, maneuvered, and headed toward Nevada. It was seen at Reno, then turned south and was spotted somewhat east of Las Vegas, where it went off radar. When it went off the radar screens, many witnesses saw it as a tremendous flaming sword. By now, it had been seen by thousands of people. It exploded near Mesquite, Nevada, at which time it was being pursued by armed jet interceptors from Nellis Air Force Base. The Las Vegas Sun reported the incident in April 19th edition under the headline Brilliant Red Explosion Flares in Las Vegas Sky. The article broached the UFO topic and mentioned the Air Force alert in several states. The Clark County Sheriff's Office was swamped with calls. They investigated the incident but found nothing of consequence. On May 8, 1962, the Air Force sent Blue Book Chief Robert Friend and J. Allen Hynek to investigate. Their results were quite unsatisfactory. The two did not go to Nevada, but confined themselves to central Utah. Despite their knowledge that jets had pursued the object, they concluded it was a boloid, an especially fiery meteor. Blue Book ultimately listed the sighting as two separate incidents in a manner so slippery and misleading that international deception seemed likely. First, it listed an April 18th multiple radar sighting at Nellis Air Force Base, which it initially labeled as unidentified, then changed to insufficient data for a scientific analysis. The report noted that the object's speed varied, that it was initially observed at ground level, then disappeared at 10,000 feet. It stated no visual despite the many people in Las Vegas who telephoned the sheriff's office. The second incident, investigated by Hynek and Friend in Utah, was listed as a boloid and said to occur on April 19th, except that this was uniquely logged in Zulu or Greenwich Mean Time, which added 7 hours and thus gave the wrong date. In reality, the Utah and Nevada sightings occurred within minutes of each other, around 8:15 p.m. Mountain Time or 7:15 Pacific Time. Even so, the official file on the Utah incident conceded that the power in Eureka was knocked out and the fighters had been scrambled from Nellis Air Force Base. On September 21st, 1962, Major C.R. Hart of the Air Force Public Information Office responded to a letter from a New York State resident about the UFO. Air Force records, he said, listed the April 18 Nevada sighting as insufficient data, but stated the object's movement suggested a U-2 or high balloon. He also stated that it was not intercepted or fired upon. All of the claims and suggestions in this letter were entirely wrong. A U-2 is fast, but not Mach 7 fast, and the idea of a balloon causing the sighting was absurd. Moreover, the juxtaposition of a U-2 and balloon as alternate explanations was nonsensical. Their respective movements and speeds were totally distinct. For the next few years, only Frank Edwards mentioned this incident, and he confirmed himself and he confined himself to the Sun article. Much later, Kevin Randall dug deeper, interviewed many witnesses, and reviewed Blue Book's files, where he discovered the time discrepancy. Randall also communicated with an anonymous man who claimed to be an Air Force lieutenant at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada in 1962. At the time of the crash, he and 30 others claimed the man were driven into the desert early in the next morning to secure and clean the area, where an unusual object crashed in the desert. They were loaded into a bus with blacked-out windows, but one window was not entirely covered, and the man claimed to have seen a damaged saucer-shaped craft. Randall's source claimed to be merely an experimental plane, the existence of which had to be protected from the Soviets due to national security considerations, although no independent source has confirmed the story. We may at least acknowledge that an object able to scramble jet interceptors from two air bases and that apparently crashed would warrant top-level military retrieval. This much is clear. A UFO crashed or explode near Las Vegas on the evening of April 18, 1962, and the Air Force hid the event from the public and in its official records. Precisely what crashed remains unknown, but the pursuit of the object by U.S. jets appears to preclude natural phenomenon or American experimental aircraft as the explanation. Next incident in New Mexico, USA, April 1962. The source of this account from 1962 was the researcher Robert D. Barry, who was cited by Leonard Stringfield in his now historic paper on UFO crash retrievals, delivered at the Mutual UFO Network Symposium in 1978. According to Barry, his data had come from a number of sources, including one within intelligence circles, as well as a scientist. Although never the exact date in 1962 nor location within New Mexico of the crash were revealed, Barry learned that the UFO was initially tracked on military radar and seemed to be experiencing high difficulty before losing altitude and impacting on the desert floor at a speed of around 90 miles an hour. The object was reportedly 68 feet in diameter and 13 feet high and contained two beings, both dead, and each 42 inches in height. Further, according to Barry, the occupants were removed the following day after impact to a major medical hospital in the U.S. Skin color was gray-pink, head slightly larger for the size of the body, eyes somewhat larger than the norm, mouth very small and thin lips. Barry's sources informed him that a team of 20 personnel worked on an analysis of the recovered vehicle at a major military base in the Southwest, the prime purpose of which was to try to understand its means of propulsion. Timmendorfer, Germany, 1962. According to retired United States Army Command Sergeant Major Robert Dean, between 1961 and 1964, NATO Supreme Headquarters, Allied powers in Europe conducted a classified investigation into the UFO subject that resulted in the publication of an 8-inch thick document titled The Assessment. Dean further stated the shape's studies concluded that a number of extraterrestrial civilizations and species were visiting the Earth and were undertaking an in-depth surveillance program. Dean also noted that, according to the assessment in 1962, British military forces were implicated in the recovery of a UFO that had crashed in the east-west German border, specifically at Timmendorfer, near the Baltic Sea. The first to arrive on the scene, said Dean, was a corps of British military engineers who succeeded in gaining entry to the crashed object. Containing inside were 12 dead alien creatures, all small in stature with large bald heads, black eyes, and gray skin. Dean stated additionally that a series of extensive autopsies of the aliens had been undertaken by the British military, who discovered the intriguing fact that all of the bodies were identical clones, or as Dean suggested, laboratory products. Dean added, "I saw all the photos taken of the beings and I couldn't believe it." In 1998, data that may have had a bearing on this case surfaced from a now retired inspector of equipment with the British Ministry of Defence. The source was working with the Royal Electric and Mechanical Engineers, REME, at the time that the incident recalled by Robert Dean allegedly occurred. "I tried to look into it," stated the source to researcher Nick Redfern. "When Bob Dean's story was first publicized, I asked my superior, who was a major in the REME, to make a few inquiries. As I was working for the REME at the time, too, I thought I had a good chance of finding someone who perhaps knew something about it. The results of the man's inquiry were perhaps predictable. The major said he was told, 'Leave it well alone.' Now, this was in England. I wouldn't say where I was, as I don't want things pinning down. But that's what he was told." Santa Rosa, New Mexico, USA, spring or winter 1963. Although known primarily for his research into the field of so-called alien abductions, researcher Bud Tompkins has uncovered from a woman allegedly directly implicated in the incident details of the intriguing UFO crash retrieval case in New Mexico in 1963, according to Hopkins. A lot in New Mexico. In 1963, late winter or early spring, she was a medical technician in a hospital in the town of Santa Rosa, New Mexico. She was not a registered nurse, but did all the x-rays and rode in the ambulance to the emergency room and so forth. It was a very tiny hospital, one doctor and very few rooms. But they got a call one day to go to a crash site. It was just described that way. The system of alerting people was very easy. There was one dispatcher who handled the state police, the town police, and the sheriff's office. We don't know who made the original report that had the dispatcher call the hospital and said there was a crash with fatalities. So she and the ambulance driver who owned the ambulance, which was an altered Ford station wagon, went racing off to the area where this event supposedly happened. She remembers it was an 18-mile drive, and when they got to an area off the road, there was a distance sitting there in the field, 2 police cars and 2 state troopers standing there. They drove off the road right into the field and up to the state policeman, got out, and lying on the ground were 3 bodies, very small. She immediately said, "Where are their parents?" And the police officer said, "I don't think they have parents. This is something unusual we have here." She said the bodies had been buried to some extent, charred, scorched on the outside. She immediately took out her stethoscope, and she was trying to feel for any vital body signs of life, and found none. And she said only 10 feet away was a pile of wreckage of metal. She didn't feel this was very big. It was roughly the size of an automobile or 2 automobiles. She asked the state trooper, whose nickname was Dutch. "What is this?" he said. "I'm going to have to notify the Air Force. I don't know what this is." She and the ambulance driver got the gurney out, lifted up 2 of the bodies, rolled them back into the back of the ambulance, took out another folding gurney, and put the other little body on that. She described the bodies as oozing some sort of brownish fluid. She didn't think it was blood, but didn't know if it was something that had been changed by the fire. One of them had a very damaged arm. They put them in the ambulance and started back to the hospital. She was very firm about getting back to the hospital because she had the feeling that since these were so strange, maybe they were still alive. There was some life, but they couldn't be saved. She wanted the doctor to come in and look at them. They pulled up to the ramp in the emergency room, went inside, took them to the x-ray room. The doctor was summoned. He came in and pronounced them dead. She said that at that point she took x-rays of all three. She said they were very small, blue, and 3.5 feet. She also did an x-ray of their heads. Meanwhile, the doctor did the necessary papers to sign away that these were deceased and dead on arrival. Within an hour or so, the Air Force arrived, came in the emergency room door. There was a man she thought was a colonel, and they ordered the bodies taken out. And she said he began to take every single thing that he could find that bore on this trip. He said, "Do you have any notes?" She said yes, and took those away. He unhooked the x-rays she had hanging up drying. She said, "You can't take those, they're still wet." He said, "I'm taking the x-rays." She said, there was a flatbed truck which she saw had an object under the tarpaulin, and this officer, before he left, said, "This did not happen. You are never to speak about this, and remember this, the government has a long arm." She was 24, scared to death. She later told me that nobody talked about it at all. She said, "What was strange was that whenever we had a fatality, a wreck, a crash, we would all be down in the cafe going over the details and talking about it as it was the big event in our area. But nobody ever mentioned that. There was a kind of understanding or fear not to mention it." She said, "I have no idea what it was we had there, but she said it was not human, whatever it was." The ambulance had been returned to the garage where it was kept. The widow of the ambulance driver had told us that the Air Force descended on that ambulance and took every single thing that they could out the back of it. The sheets, any objects, anything movable, cleaned out the whole thing. She said, "We were never paid for anything. This stays hidden for years and years." The thing that got her thinking about it, she said, was that she saw some television sequences of starving children in Somalia, and she said they had these strangely shaped bodies and big heads because of being so emaciated. She thought that's what those little things looked like. Charlton, England, July 1963. The mystery of what became known as Charlton Carter began in the early hours of 16 July 1963 when several witnesses recalled seeing the unusual aerial activity in the Charlton area of England. There was Leonard Jolliffe, who was employed at Manor Farm, Charlton, who reported hearing an unusual explosion in the vicinity, and there was a local police officer who recalled seeing an unidentified orange light streak across the sky before disappearing in the Charlton area. However, the most important witness was a farm worker, Reginald Alexander, who discovered a crater-like depression near Manor Farm several hours after Leonard Joliffe heard the explosion. Concerned at what he had uncovered, Alexander quickly informed his employer, Roy Blanchard, arriving at the scene. Blanchard was amazed to see a circular area of flattened ground, 8 feet in diameter and outwardly spreading spoke marks which gave the impression that something tangible had come into contact with the earth. Blanchard, fully appreciating the potential seriousness of the events, contacted the police, who in turn called the army. Quickly on the scene was Captain John Rogers, chief of the British Army Bomb Disposal Unit at Horsham. According to Blanchard in an interview with the press, there isn't a trace of the potatoes and barley which were growing there where the crater is now. No stalks, no leaves, no roots. The thing was heavy enough to crush rocks and stones to powder. I believe that we have received a visit from a spaceship from another world. Captain Roy Rogers confirmed that he too considered the event to be unusual. Captain Rogers confirms that I just said that there is no evidence to burn. There is no evidence of burn or scorch marks, and I could find no trace of an explosion. My superiors and I are baffled, he informed the media. 3 days later, the Army's Southern Command revealed the preliminary investigations had led bomb disposal experts to believe that a large object, probably metallic, was secreted deep within the crater. 48 hours afterwards, the Army brought in a team of impressively equipped individuals, and a furthermore in-depth investigation of the crater was begun. One theory was that particularly popular among the bomb disposal team was that the crater had been formed following the detonation of a long buried German bomb, presumably dropped by an aircraft during the Second World War. The only problem with this theory, as the nation's media noted, was that if a bomb had exploded then what was the metallic object that was apparently still buried there? Then came a breakthrough. The Army announced that it had discovered something deep within the crater. This announcement delighted the press, who began reporting on numerous rumors circulated throughout Charlton to the effect that an alien spacecraft had been recovered from the crater. According to the Army, however, this was not the case. What they had recovered, they said, was a weighty lump of rock believed to have been a meteorite. Since the analysis of what was perceived to be meteorite debris was outside the official scope of the British Army, on July 24, 1963, the rock was forwarded to specialists at the British Museum for study. 2 days later, the British Museum made an announcement. The piece of rock was not a meteorite. It was a lump of standardized ironstone of a type found across the southern portion of Great Britain. According to Dr. G.F. Claringbull, the museum's keeper of mineralogy, it is the sort of thing that some people would easily find at the bottom of their garden. Certainly this specimen is not a meteorite. Of course, with the meteorite theory now discarded, the question remained, what had caused the Charlton crater? A spokesman for the Army's Southern Command told the press, as far as we are concerned, the matter is closed. It is not a bomb, so it has nothing to do with us. The cause of the hole and its surrounding phenomena is still unexplained, but it is not part of the Army's task to unravel such mysteries. Even Joseph Godber, the Secretary of War, conceded that the matter had not been satisfactorily resolved. However, no one within the world of officialdom seemed to want to take the matter any further. Then came a stunning admission on 25 August 1963. John Southern, a television repairman from Wembley, Middlesex, came forward and claimed that he, along with 2 friends, was responsible for hoaxing the public and Army over the crater. I was one of the hoaxers, he said at the time. There were 2 others in it, but I have promised not to tell their names. He stated that it was the intention of all 3 to dig a number of craters throughout the country and to give the impression that something from outer space had landed. To reinforce the hoax, Southern added that the trio had planned to leave near one of the craters a car with its doors wide open and a lace-up shoe inside to make it appear that the drivers had been abruptly wrenched from the car. Southern said that it had been their intention to drag the car to the edge of the crater while its brakes were on, thus creating the impression that it had been dragged to the crater's edge by a powerful magnetic force. The caper then became even more elaborate. Southern would go into hiding for a few days, and then, after had been misled, would resurface with a remarkable tale describing his kidnap at the hands of alien beings. I would say I had been to a space station, Southern told the press. This would be less complicated than a story about vanishing or about visiting another planet, as my observations would be limited to and easier to explain. He elaborated further. The first crater was dug at a lonely spot near Haddington in Scotland, where my friends were staying, and the second was then prepared on a farm in Wiltshire. My friends returned to London and watched the papers for the discovery. When the story appeared, I remember asking one of my friends why they dug channels coming out of the crater. He said, It's the experts who have to do the guessing, not us. It all caused quite a stir, but not nearly enough. However, we decided to look for a site for our third crater. I volunteered to lend a hand at digging this one, but my friends developed blisters on their hands digging the first two, and if this happened to me, it would connect me with the digging when I was later found. My part of the stunt was getting close now, and I was being briefed on the things I should say when I returned to Earth. But at the last moment I realized I was not cut out for the part. I had been getting steadily more nervous as the scheme went on. I knew I could never have kept up the act after my reappearance. Apart from the ordeal I put my family through, my friends were not too disappointed when I let them down because they were not entirely happy about the spot we had chosen, and they had expected more publicity about the first two craters. They were still keen to go on, but neither could take my part in the hoax, as their holidays were nearly over. Why am I telling this story now? Because I have been a fool. Hold on a second. Okay. After the publicity afforded John Southern's confession spread throughout the British media, a number of commentators made valuable observations. First, Southern's two friends were rather too conveniently missing. Second, his version of events could not explain the presence of a metallic something apparently detected deep within the crater by the Army. And third, Southern could not have been responsible for the unusual aerial activity that occurred at Charlton shortly before the craft was discovered. For its part, however, the Army was content to accept John Southern's version of events. We had 6 men working on the crater for 10 days, said Major H.P. Qualtrough of the Horsham Bomb Disposal Unit. They could have been on much more important work. If it's a hoax, I'm prepared to laugh with the next man. We often get hoaxed. We just accept it in good grace. All I can say is that at the time this appeared to be quite genuine. Notably, Roy Blanchard, the owner of Manor Farms, was totally discounting the possibility that John Southern's version of events was correct. I don't believe this story, that the whole thing was a hoax, Blanchard said. I think anyone who believes it was a hoax is being hoaxed. Although John Southern's account of how the Charlton crater came to be formed attracted a great deal of press interest, it went largely unreported that, shortly after he confessed, Southern changed his story and admitted that his version of events itself was a hoax. According to Southern, on hearing about the crater, he initially felt that it simply had to be the work of a hoaxer. Confessing that he was the hoaxer, Southern reasoned, would inevitably force the real hoaxers into the open. Southern was, after all, reaping the publicity for their efforts. However, total silence prevailed, and no one else came forward to counter Southern's initial claim that he and 2 friends were responsible for the crater. An ironic twist, Southern's last word on the Charlton crater was that he now considered that it had been created by nothing less than a UFO. Interestingly, declassified Royal Air Force and Air Ministry memoranda demonstrates that in precisely the same week as the Charlton crater was discovered, something within air intelligence was displaying keen interest in obtaining reports of UFOs on the ground. On July 25, 1963, for example, a huge egg-shaped UFO was seen on terra firma near Salisbury, now Hare. Terra firma. Are they referring to Earth? Southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, a report was filed with British Air Intelligence by the Royal Rhodesian Air Force, who had forwarded the details via the British Defence Liaison Staff in Southern Rhodesia. Curiously, the official report sent to the Air Intelligence is missing from the now declassified UFO files of the Air Ministry. However, a brief note of the event is highlighted in a two-page document forwarded to a division of the Air Ministry known as Secretariat 6, which chiefly investigated UFO reports received from the general public. Although the ministry's files contained nothing else of any significance concerning the Charlton crater, it is of potential significance that in the months that followed further craters were discovered at a variety of locations in the British Isles. On November 25, 1963, a similar depression to that discovered at Charlton was found on farmland at Home Farm Belton near Grantham. So far, nothing has been found to suggest that there is actually an unexploded bomb in the field, said Captain J. E. Rogers, officer commanding No. 2 Troop at Horsham, in answer to questions raised about the Nottingham Guardian Journal newspaper. We have been drilling in the vicinity and inserting metal detectors in an effort to trace any metal which could indicate the presence of a bomb, added Captain Rogers. Ultimately, nothing was found. 3 months later, on February 11, 1964, another similar crater was located, this time at Slackstead near Bracefield. The site was once again farmland, the discovery having been made in a newly plowed field by two forestry workers. Yet again, bomb disposal experts were rushed to the scene. No bomb was found. Today, the case of Charlton crater still provokes occasional controversy, but several things seem certain. John Southern's confession can clearly be discounted, as can the theories that the crater was the result of a meteorite impact or the explosion of a Nazi bomb that had lain undetected for almost 20 years. In addition, there is no conclusive explanation was ever provided for the strange aerial activity seen in the area prior to the crater having been found. If the Charlton crater was the result of a genuine UFO hitting the ground, then in this instance it was obviously the case of the one that got away. And that's about it for today.